My name is Dominique Wilson, and I am the author of Orphan Rock that you can see on your screen. I'm talking to you from Adelaide in South Australia, and it's a cold, wet night. More muggy than cold, but very wet anyway. Anyway, I hope you enjoy what I have to say to you about my research and my book. While we wait for a few people to sign on, I think I might tell you about my other books first. My first was The Yellow Papers. I've got to get that here. There we go. Which is the first book, and it's set between Australia and China from 1872 till about the 1960s. And it tells a story of Chen Mu, a young boy that was sent to America just after the Opium Wars to study the ways of the West. But unfortunately, by the time he's a teenager, he has to flee, and he ends up in Australia working in the town that's now called Silverton. And after a while, he becomes gardener to a rich pastoralist. And there, he thinks his life is finally settled. But then the bubonic plague hits Sydney, and the pastoralist's daughter returns to her father's property with her son Edward. But, for Edward, it's a very lonely life. He's only a small boy and he's surrounded by adults. So he befriends Chen Mu, and Chen Mu teaches him a whole lot of things about China, so that by the time Edward is an adult, he goes to Shanghai in the 20s to make his fortune. Very decadent place at the time. And there he falls in love with the wife of a Chinese businessman. And over the years, he tries to go back to China to see her. And then years later, the Japanese invade China at the beginning, just before the war. And of course, they're torn apart, and it's many, many years before they get together again. So that one is The Yellow Papers. I'll get the hang of how this works in a minute. Hello, there's people coming up. Let me just say hello. Jane, lovely to see you here too. And from Geelong, Wendy. Hello, Wendy. Two Wendy's, one from the Fleurieu Peninsula, Christine from Ballarat, Bev also from Adelaide, Wendy from Wagga. A warm welcome, Dominique from Louise. Thank you, Louise. And you're looking forward to reading my book, Christine. Thank you so much. Let me just tell you about another one of my books first. That one, there we go, That Devil's Madness. And That Devil's Madness centers around the Algerian War of Independence. And it's a book that's pretty close to my heart because my parents were French and living in Algeria when I was born. And by the time I was 2 years old, the War of Independence started. And when we left when I was 10, it was still going. So it's a pretty special book. And in this book, you have Louis, who's a young boy who goes to Algeria from France with his father when the government was giving away land grants. Maybe on this side, that's better. Was giving away land grants to colonize the country. And there he befriends a young Berber boy, and the two become like brothers. So they're so close, and they grow up, they do well. Louis becomes mayor of the town, and Imez, the Berber boy, becomes leader of his tribe. But then the War of Independence starts, and all of a sudden you have Louis and Imez on opposite sides of the conflict. And added to that is Nicolette, who, like her grandfather, is also friends with a Berber girl. But when Louis and his family and Nicolette moved to Australia, Nicolette tends to forget about Algeria, but then as she grows up, she becomes a photojournalist. And when she hears about President Boumediene, who's dying, she wants to go to cover the story. That's the official version, but really she's hoping to retrace her grandfather's footsteps and rekindle some of the bonds that were there, except that when she gets there, she finds that, everything has changed and not necessarily for the better. So that's That Devil's Madness. And let me say hello to a few more people first. Kat Wilson, my daughter. Hello, Katie. Of course you're here. You always are. Christine, you're looking forward to reading my new book. Thank you, Christine. Jen from Hoppers Crossing. Deborah from Somerville. Lynn, did I enjoy writing when I was younger? When did you take up writing books? I didn't write as such. I didn't write when I was younger. After I had my daughters, I have two daughters, and after I had my daughters, we used to make up stories and write them down sometimes. And it wasn't until then that I started to realize that I really enjoyed that. And at first I wanted to study illustration, book illustration, children's book illustration. So I went to uni for that, and found that although they covered pretty well all aspects of illustration, they of course didn't touch on the actual writing of the book to illustrate. So I started doing what they called bug subjects at the uni I went to, the University of South Australia. You had to do so many bug subjects each year, when that meant broadening undergraduate education, which meant that you could pick any subject that had nothing to do with your course. So, of course, I picked all the creative writing subjects, and that's when I started to seriously consider writing. And then I found I preferred, maybe because my children were growing up, but I found I preferred writing for adults than children, and it went from there. So, hello from Invernock, Sabine. Hello, Sabine. Okay. Now let me tell you about Orphan Rock. It's on your screen, but I'll hold it here anyway. Okay, here we go. Orphan Rock spans from the late 1800s until World War II. And it's about two women. The first is Bessie, who believes herself to be an orphan, until a man rolls up at the orphanage and says he's her new father, and her mother wants her back. So, she goes with him. Things don't turn out as she'd hoped. All her dreams of having a mother and a home and all that don't quite work out like that. But she grows up, and as she grows up, she finds that the norms of the time, maybe that's better back here, she finds that the norms of the time are really restrictive, and she starts to fight against that. But, it's not an easy road in those times to be going against the norm. The other woman is Kathleen, her daughter, and that's a few years. The book is like in two parts, Bessie and Kathleen. And Kathleen discovers a secret about her neighbour, a boy that she's hoping to marry. And the secret shocks her, so that she ends up going to France, to Paris, where she gets work in the atelier of fashion designer Paul Poiret. But then World War I is declared, and things change drastically for Kathleen as well. In Orphan Rock, I wanted to look at what life was like for women who had very little to say in what happened to them, and also what happened to them when they dared go against the norm. It's a story about friendship and about love and about the family you create as opposed to the family you're born with. And it's also a story about how world events influence the ordinary person. You know, you always hear of big world events, their politicians' point of view, but very rarely the ordinary person on the street's point of view. And that's what I wanted to look at. I don't want to tell you too much more because if you've read it, you already know it. And if you haven't read it, I'm going to spoil the story for you. Let me just check if there's anyone else. Sabine, I've said hello. Okay. What I do want to do, if that's okay with everybody, is show you some things that I found during my research that I thought was pretty amazing or surprising or just interesting, okay? Now, have you ever wondered how did people wake up before alarm clocks? Okay? That was one of the things I had to look at because, of course, not everybody had alarm clocks even when they were invented. Bring on the knocker-upper. I put her here. Can you see that? Now, before the Industrial Revolution, time was, you judge time by night or day or by the tides or by the town clock tower clock. But once the Industrial Revolution started and people started working in factories and working shifts, all of a sudden they had to be there on time. But clocks were extremely expensive at the beginning. So what they had were knocker-uppers. And they were either elderly gentlemen or ladies who went around and for a fee would either tap on your window or, like this lady here, use a pea shooter to shoot peas at your window until you woke up. And the fee varied depending on how early you had to wake up. And the earlier, of course, the more expensive it was. So that was the early alarm clocks. Even policemen used to work as knocker-uppers on their morning rounds to, increase their income. Knocker-uppers died out in the 1940s when alarm clocks became more affordable. Few more people. Dominique, have any of your books been recorded as audio books? No, unfortunately. I wish they were, but they're not. Jane, what's the inspiration for your book? Well, after That Devil's Madness, I started writing another book based in Sierra Leone. And my publisher came to Adelaide one day for a festival and we had lunch. And he said, it would be good if you were to write a historical novel set in Australia. And I thought, okay, take the hint. And at the time I was reading a book about the biography of Louisa Lawson. Now, everybody knows of Henry Lawson, but not everybody knows about Louisa. Let me just show you. I have a picture of Louisa here for you. Can you see that? This side. Okay. Now, Louisa was a really interesting woman because she lived in country Victoria where she married Peter Lawson, and they later changed Lawson to Lawson. But they had 5 children, including Henry, but she soon got fed up with him always taking off to go to the goldfields and so on. So she left him and she came to Sydney. And at first she made ends meet by taking in washing and taking in boarders. But after a while, she bought a failing newspaper, The Republican. She kept it going for a year, and then she started a journal for women called The Dawn. Excuse me a second. And in The Dawn, she told women about what was going on around the world as far as women's suffrage was concerned. And the journal also included recipes and hints and even dressmaking patterns at the time. And Louisa kept up this whole women's suffrage thing going pretty well all her life until she died. So yeah, so I was reading that and I thought, okay, she's interesting. Let's see what else is interesting in Sydney at the time. And I started researching about, you know, the people that were in Sydney, the history of Sydney at the time, and so on. And I thought, yeah, you know, there's a story there. It's definitely an interesting topic. One particular character, if I have time, which I may not have the way it's going so quickly, was Kwong Tart. And I'll show you a quick picture of Kwong without telling you anything about it. If you're interested, I have written up about him on my website, dominiquewilson.com.au. That's the gentleman. Kwong, I'll give you a very brief talk about Kwong. He was very interesting. He was a small, he's described as small, 5'4", I think they said he was, Chinese man who spoke with a Scottish accent and loved the poetry of Robbie Burns, who came here as a boy. The Scottish accent was because when he was here in Australia, he stayed with a family that was Scottish, so he learned English with a Scottish accent. But this was a time when there were great anti-Chinese sentiments throughout all of Australia. Kwong managed to become so respected that even government officials used to come and ask him to help with any problem with the Chinese. Sorry. Look him up if you have a chance. He really, really was an interesting chap. So yeah, you know, when I started getting all these interesting characters, another one that was very interesting, which you probably know about, you may not recognize this lady because when they made her, she was part of Underbelly series. This is Tilly Devine. Have you heard of Tilly Devine? She and Kate Lee were gang queens in Sydney further along in my story. And if you watched Underbelly season 4, it's all about Tilly and her rival and the razor wars that they used to have. When the government made handguns illegal, the gang started using cutthroat razors to fight so badly that Darlinghurst became known as Razorhurst. Self-explanatory. That's the inspiration for my book, Jane. Lynn asks, it's an interesting cover. Did you have a say in the cover design? Not the cover well, yes and no. What happens, I don't know if all publishers do it, but mine does. The cover is by a Melbourne designer called Peter Lowe, and I think he's brilliant. He's actually done all 3 of my covers. But when the book is getting ready for publication, Peter sent me 6 or 7 possible covers, all very different, for me to pick from. And then once I pick the one I like, then we have a look whether anything needs fixing, you know, maybe the font or the size or whatever. This particular cover, nothing needed fixing. I loved it just as it was. Wendy. Oh, how we forget even our younger days with the old alarm clock. The clock radio is an alarm clock. No good if a blackout. Definitely true there, Wendy. In fact, I still prefer using, call me old-fashioned, a clock that has batteries just in case there's blackouts. Okay, we'll wait to see if there's any more. While we're waiting, I want to tell you about something you might find interesting. You probably all know about the Moulin Rouge in Montmartre in Paris, especially during the late 1800s, early 1900s. But did you know about 3 other cabarets that were rather macabre? I'm going to show you this. First you have, they were also all in Montmartre, by the way, the Cabaret Néant. And this is actually a candelabra. Now, the Cabaret Néant stands for the Cabaret of Death. And when you entered the cabaret, you were greeted by a pallbearer in a top hat who took you to the drinking room, where all the tables were actually empty coffins. And the candelabras, that's better. Candelabras were made of human bones. They are actually human bones with, candles stuck in. Pretty macabre. And you were offered a drink, and all the drinks were named after deadly diseases. And while you were, having your drink, the master of ceremony would come around and he'd point at scenes of people getting executed by the guillotine, of battle scenes. And after a while, the scene would start to glow, and all the people in the scene would turn to skeletons. That was the Cabaret of Death. There were 3 cabarets like that. The second cabaret, this side, I'll get used to this by the time we're finished. This is the Cabaret of Heaven, le Cabaret du Ciel. And with the Cabaret du Ciel, you walked in through a blue and white entrance, and you'd be greeted by an angel, and as you walked in, St. Peter would be there sprinkling you with holy water. And I don't know if you can see it properly, you'd be expected to go and kneel and do the sign of the cross to a pig festooned with flowers. And then you went and sat down, and when you sat down, all these naked angels used to come around and sit on your lap and ask you if you were interested in hearing their confession. That was the Cabaret of Heaven. And I'll get to more questions in just a second. I'll be quick with this one. See that one? Ooh. And this was hell, of course, the Cabaret of Hell. And you entered, where are we? This way. Through the mouth, it was red mouth. And you went through, and inside you would have the ceilings and the walls were covered with, bodies of the damned. And there was rocks and crevices and flames and thick smoke smelling of sulfur used to come out into the room, and thunder rumbled in the distance. And throughout the night, a man dressed as a devil would come and demand to know from you, which of your sins have brought you here. So, there were quite cabarets. The Cabaret Néant was closed in the mid-1950s, the one with the candelabra, and the other 2, which were sitting next to each other, were demolished in 1950 to make way for a supermarket. Okay, back to questions. How long did it take you to write your novel, and how did it feel to hold your book once it was published? Second, that's with Jane. How did it feel? Absolutely wonderful. And it doesn't matter whether it's the first book or the third book, it still feels absolutely wonderful. I get sent a number of author copies. And when the box arrives and you open it, because of course up until then everything you see is just on the screen, and you pick it up and you think, oh my God, that's my book. How long did it take me? 4 years. Like I said, before that, there was almost a year with me writing this other book that ended up not going anywhere. It took me 4 years because there's so much research. I think I would have spent a good year and a bit researching and taking notes before even starting to write the story. Would I be correct in guessing you're a plotter rather than a penster? Anne of Preston asks. Yes, I am a plotter, mainly because my books tend to cover such a big timeline. And what I do, I always start an Excel file, and across the top I have, all the characters. If I don't have a name, it's just, main woman 1, main woman 2, and so on. And down the side of the Excel file, I put the years, one cell for each year. And then as I research, I put important bits. I also have a column like Sydney history, Australian history, world history. And as I research anything that I think might be useful or interesting, I put in that Excel file. And that's really important because, for example, where I have the characters, I also put their ages, the year they're born, and then how in Excel you can just pull down and then it fills it in. And I have, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old. That's really important because then just at a glance, I can tell if this character was too young, if there's a war declared to be called up, or, this character's been going, my goodness, by now he'd be 99 years old. I better go back and kill him off somewhere or have him die in some way. So, yes, from that point of view. And of course, because I do that, at the same time I get ideas. I read about something happening and I think, oh, this character would have been influenced in this way. So I write a little note in my Excel file about that idea. So yes, definitely. I can't imagine for the type of books that I write, I know some people, manage to write without plotting at all, but for the type of books that I write, I think I definitely need to plot. Denise, hello Denise. Hi Dominique, love this book. Thank you Denise, I appreciate that. Carol, hi from the Gold Coast. I've read your book and absolutely loved it. Thank you Carol, it means a lot. Bev, your website blog has fascinating information. I'm enjoying reading the articles. Thank you Bev. Thank you. I didn't actually have a blog about my research until I started this book, but I think I'll keep it up. Better Reading, here's a link to Dominique's website. Thank you, Better Reading. Kelly, thank you. Julie, wonderful and interesting chat. Thank you, Dominique, which just reminded me, I just look at the clock and we're out of time. Thank you for speaking with us tonight, Dominique. Some great information presented. Thank you, Wendy. I hope you found it interesting. Okay. Unfortunately, as much as I've enjoyed talking to you all, I only have half an hour. I want to thank Better Reading for having me here. And I want to thank all of you for joining me. It really means a lot to connect with your readers. It's otherwise your book's out there and you don't know what people think, or they could be using it to throw across the room. Christine, thank you for a very interesting and informative evening. Thank you, Christine. Marion, thank you. Thank you too. Okay, I have to go. If you would like to know more about my research, do have a look at my website. It's dominiquewilson.com.au. And if you have any questions at all, even months from now, don't hesitate to contact me. You can contact me either through my website or through my Facebook page. If you just Google Dominique Wilson plus author plus Facebook, it'll take you straight to it. Okay. Thank you all for being here.